Hi, my name is Coach Gabe. I'm a strength conditioning coach here at Upper Iowa University, and today I'm going to be talking about Soviet periodization. So, brief introduction. This book was brought together by a number of different gentlemen up here at the board. Some guys being giants within our field, right? And their main purpose was to adapt Soviet periodization to American strength conditioning, and with the main focus of practical application for collegiate individual sport, as well as the goal of optimizing athletic performance through structured training cycles. The principles of Soviet periodization were focusing a lot on the long-term application of their athletes and longevity purposes, and with a great emphasis on their quality of movement. Now, this is broken up into their macros, their mesos, as well as their microcycles, and then bleeding into their preparatory, their competitive season, as well as that transition phase, with fluctuations in that volume and intensity over that period of time, with specific adaptations and delayed transformation within the specific periods of time within their cycles. Now, a brief review with the macro, it's 9 to 12 months, and this can go from 1 to 4 years, just depending on which demographic you're working with. Now, if you're working more the Olympic side, or Olympic athletes, this can be about 4 years long. But for general college and even some high school and even developing ages, this can be about 9 to 12 month mark, depending on how long they are in sport. And then after this one, we have that meso and that microcycle. That mesocycle is going to be about 3 to 6 weeks long. 3 to 6 weeks long, with a large focus on that strength, power, and hypertrophy. And then that microcycle, you're focusing more on that weekly plan, right? So you're really going to be ensuring that volume and that intensity are going to be undulated appropriately, just depending on the time of season that the athlete's in. One of the gentlemen that was up on the board, he had a huge impact on this book, so he focused a lot on Vermeil's hierarchy. And the base work of this is always having some sort of assessment or evaluation done on your athletes whenever they first come in. That way you can see if there's any movement insufficiencies or if they have trouble doing specific things in the weight room, right? And then building off of that, you're going to go into that work capacity. And that work capacity is just trying to get them used to the load and the environment of the weight room itself, as well as trying to reinforce good technique and increase some of that strength and hypertrophy as well. And then strength, right after that, is just force. It's their ability to produce force and producing a lot of force. And going into that explosive strength, that one is purely power. So it's the combination of all the things below that, which then are going to bleed into that explosive strength. So that force times velocity, right? Trying to move things as fast as possible with load on their backs or from the floor. And then that elastic and reactive strength is coined terms from the book, like your strength speed and your speed strength, where it can either be an emphasis on how fast weight is moving or with a little bit more force dominant with some of that speed element brought into it. And then at the top, which is the holy grail as they termed it, is a culmination of all of those things previously. So it's the ability to apply force and change the direction or multi-directional movements with that speed element as well. So whenever they're talking about speed, it's the acceleration, that max velocity work, that fast ground contact time, or even the weight room trying to move things with speed. And one thing they said is you can improve it, but you can't teach it, right? So, and now looking into this system, there are 5 phases. So it starts with the general prep. So this can range from a couple of weeks, so 2 to 4 weeks, just depending on the demographic you're working with. Sometimes you can do just 2 weeks if they really don't need that extensive 3 to 4. And then moving into your special prep, so this can be sport-specific movements as well as strength. And then your pre-competition, so your peak strength as well as a higher intensity with that decrease in that decrease in that volume. So that's where that undulation effect starts to take place, especially since they are going to be moving into their season. And then that competition phase, you're mainly just trying to keep it healthy. You want to move that needle just a little bit, but still maintaining a lot of the things that you developed within the off-season or even in that pre-season. And then that transition phase is more that recovery and that mental reset for them, especially after their long season. So tapering everything down with their intensity and that volume. So just getting back to a little bit of full range work and some of the basics at the very beginning of the off season before they start going into their actual off season work where everything starts to get ramped up. Now in the book they had a number of different models demonstrating their undulation, conjugate, and linear progression. And at the top of the screen you have that linear periodization model where it's just that gradual development in the volume and intensity. But at the bottom, it's the system's undulated periodization where the volume and the intensity will go up and down, but the big picture of it is that slow and gradual increase of either intensity and volume over that period of time. So you can't see it from where you're sitting, but the off season is on that very left side where your intensity and that volume is going to be much greater, right? So you're building that GPP, that foundation, as well as that work capacity, and then you're going to move over into that preseason where that volume starts to taper down, but then the intensity and the effort really starts to ramp up. And then during their competition season, they will keep that intensity much higher as well as their effort, but then the volume of their work starts to come down a little bit more. That's mainly just to move that needle a little bit more in terms of their athletic performance without putting so much wear and tear on their body. And then tapering down now into that active reset or that active rest, that's where you're going to have your tapering of the intensity as well as the volume, because now they're into that postseason. So just trying to work a little bit of that volume and get some of that blood back into the joints and some of that stiffness, trying to work those things out. Now, as I've mentioned previously, that load and intensity management, you're always going to be undulating over each cycle. Right? You're paying attention to how it is that they move, how it is that they practice, and then accommodating that throughout the year. Now at the very bottom, this is just a 4-week cycle that they have already built out for you. And now at the very first week, you just have a drop in that volume, but then a slight increase in that intensity. And then over a period of time, you start to see it slightly move up with that intensity, with that reduction in volume. So if one goes up, the other one's going to come down. So it has that inverse relationship with one another. And now, understanding your demographic, right? So here at the top, you have your emphasis of quality development over time, and the left of the graph, you have that training volume in terms of percent. At the bottom of the graph, under each one of the groups, you have your novice, your advanced, and your elite athlete. So novice could be someone like people that have never touched a barbell before, or their training age is really low, or this could be middle school or even high school. And with that, you're building up that work capacity, you're building that strength for them, and as well as some of that hypertrophy. So it's getting them to understand their bodies a little bit more, but then have that quality movement develop over a period of time, right? And then as you move into advanced and elite, that work capacity and that strength will teeter down just a little bit, but not too much, just depending on what part of the season that they're in. And then you start placing a little bit more emphasis on that power and speed, because without that foundation of strength and that understanding of how the body moves, then you really can't express that true power and speed like you need to. And that can open up to more risk of injury for them if they don't know how to apply that force, especially at a very high velocity or high speed. So example that I have is women's wrestling. This is something that I built out for my team this year. This is their macro cycle that I had built out for them. They're a pretty new team. I don't know the athletes entirely well. Some of the girls have injuries as well as training age, so it's made it a lot more realistic is what you're going to be seeing whenever you are coaching. Now, they first came in August, and then we had that second to last week of August all the way up until about middle October to really develop them and try to get them to build some of the strength, understand some of the movement patterns, and build some work capacity. That way, moving into November, their preseason, and going into their competition, we have the understanding of, okay, this is what the barbell feels like on my back, and being able to produce that force, and then increasing that intensity just gradually over that period of time. Now, because there are so few girls in the actual program, I have to be very cautious of how much volume and intensity I'm going to give to them, because there's only so much that they can handle, especially with just such a small group. So always paying attention not just in the macro, but the micro as well, and then making those adjustments along the way. So the very bottom I had my percentages, but those can always fluctuate just depending on how intense their training can be in practice and what we do here in the weight room. So always trying to keep those things in mind as we move forward. The key takeaways were understanding the structure of your training needs to be smart. You have to be really smart about how it is that you're going into your teams and knowing when to push, when you can't push, as well as having some sort of template. It might not be exactly what it's going to be on your Excel spreadsheet or what you have written down, but having some sort of guidance along the way can really help. So understanding your macros, your mesos, and your micros to at least balance some of the load in that recovery, and then being able to apply that undulation effect over that period of time. But with the big picture of it, having that increase in intensity and effort over that period of time with that deviation in volume as they're in that preseason and as well as their competition phase, and then adapting phases to their sport-specific needs. So again, like I was saying, just because you have something written down on paper doesn't mean that you're always going to run with it, right? So you have to be very adaptable, and then peaking with the right mindset with the athletes, especially into their season or during their season, just to make sure that they're not too banged up, but they can still feel pretty fresh either going into practice or even going into the weekend for their sport.